Well, the funniest portion of this is to me, like, I'm not here blaming Alabama for getting in. I'm not blaming Texas for getting in. That decision wasn't made by them to get in. But I do think it's funny that the College Football Playoff Committee, and I also think that it's hilarious that ESPN and so on knew months before. What if I thought? I mean, what if it was before the season started? Everybody knew Nick Saban last year was the year, this last year that just happened. Is it just a big coincidence that ESPN was pushing the narrative before Jordan Travis got hurt? Is it just a coincidence that Bama needed to get in for the last year that Coach Saban was going to be a head coach at Alabama? Was it a coincidence that as soon as that's over, he still has some type of position at Alabama? Is it just a coincidence that he's getting hired by ESPN to be on College Game Day? Is all of it just a? It's just a big coincidence that all these things took place. It's just a big coincidence that the ACC did not speak up for Florida State or its conference members in periodness, because you could have had the argument that this was the best year that the ACC's had, maybe ever. They had 11 teams playing a bowl game. It's the most that we've ever had playing a bowl game in one season. So 11 of your conference members played in a bowl game, so they beat each other up. That's an argument. Am I saying that it's true? Am I saying that this was the best ACC has ever looked? Maybe combined together, this might be the best that they've ever looked because 11 of them made it to a bowl game. So your weakness status that some of those would like to put out there, well, that's the ACC. They're not the SEC. They're not the Big Ten. They're not this. They're not that. But 11 of our teams made it to a bowl game, whereas one of them went 13-0, winning the ACC championship without its starting quarterback. Everybody talks about, well, Jordan went down. That's why we didn't let him in. So you're telling me it's not more impressive that you go beat a top 20 or top 10, whatever they were, Louisville offensive team, beating them without your starting quarterback. Your defense dominates the game, but that's less impressive because you're without Jordan Travis. To me, that's more impressive. You had less tools to use to win that football game. Everybody played a game of almost perfection on defense for sure. And oh, they don't deserve to be in, or they're not good enough to be in. It's
Well,
all wound together
I'm
to
going to
me.
play devil's advocate when it comes to that. So my devil's advocate position is, if somebody would have asked me, and I was obviously asked, and even if I wasn't asked, this is my job. This is what I do, is talk about college football every day. So my opinion's out there every day. Was Florida State one of the four best teams in the nation at the end of the season without Jordan Travis? My answer would be no, in my opinion. However, if I was asked and gave my opinion, should Florida State be in the college football playoffs based on what they've accomplished, based on what everyone's accomplished, and based on the resume, my answer was always yes, uh, that they should be in the playoffs. So the committee uh, should be making selections that are logical. So they should include Florida State. However, they've got a huge out, and they always have since day one in 2014, that they are charged to select the four best teams. And they can pull that injury card. Now, what didn't make sense, so I'm flipping back to Florida State, what didn't make sense is that they didn't play the card when the injury happened. They kept Florida State in a position. And again, I'll go back to the rankings and the games the weekend of championship play when Florida State was number, what were they going into the championship game? Were they number 3?
Yes.
I can't even remember. 3 or 4, yeah.
They were 3 or 4. They were in the playoff. And they were playing Louisville, who I believe was 13th in the country. And Texas was playing number 19 or 20, 21, Oklahoma State. And we can go back and forth about who was more impressive. Florida State's defense was more impressive. Texas's offense was more impressive. Florida State beat a team with a better resume in Louisville. And how do you fall from 4 to or 3 to 5 or 4 to 5? And how does Texas and Alabama, how do they move their way above you, especially the Texas example, And of course, Texas beat Bama, so Bama's really the one that shouldn't have been in.
See, that's why I want to address the front half of what you said there. Like, I get it because there's opinions. You can do a power ranking, like a legit, like take away what you deserve power ranking at any time. But when you want to talk about, okay, well, I don't know if Florida State was a top 4 team without their quarterback. Okay, well, let's examine the evidence. They lost their quarterback, and there was only 2 or 3 games that were played. When you go look at the teams that supposedly the evidence for why FSU isn't as good as Bama, isn't as good as Texas, all these different teams, rivalry week, they had as bad or worse issues with the worst teams or as bad a teams as the Florida team we faced and like didn't beat them as good. Like Alabama needed a miracle to beat Auburn, and you just agreed on that one. It's like Texas did lose to an Oklahoma team. It's like, yeah, sure, you could possibly, do that. We could argue that, but like you said, they never pulled that card out before of, oh, well, we can just choose the best team, so we're going to leave out the undefeated Power 5. That's always been, and they've came out right and said that. If all things are equal, it can be a determining factor. But all things weren't equal. You had 2 teams with losses. Like, that's the big, that's the huge stink about it all. But other, from a Florida State perspective, it's like, that's it's pure opinion, which is fine. We all do it and stuff, but it's just like, I can't, just flex, just like capitalize enough how just outrageous it was that it happened.
What about that we had a true freshman quarterback with more passing yards in his conference championship game than what you saw Michigan's quarterback get? 3 weeks in a row, our true freshman quarterback had better yards than Michigan's quarterback. Not to mention the facts. This is how I look at it. Alabama lost to a Texas team lost to an Oklahoma team. Therefore, Bama lost to a team that lost to Oklahoma. There's, whether they're good wins or good losses or ugly losses, they still go down as a loss. Where you had a team that had a true freshman quarterback, you had 3 opportunities to take them out with a lesser quarterback, and somehow they still won all 3 of those games. Did they win by the skin of their teeth? No. They won a conference championship on a team that was supposedly one of the best offenses in the country? Yes. You only allowed them to score 6 points? Yes. But, your quarterback play isn't as good as the other 3 teams, because that was what they said. They didn't just say because you lost Jordan Travis to an injury. They said because your quarterback play isn't up to par with the other 4 teams. Now, if you was to use that subjective of what they're using, that subject, the gentleman that won the national title had the worst stats as a quarterback in the past 6 games out of all the teams, including 5 and 6. You have worse stats than Georgia's quarterback. You have worse stats than Florida State's quarterback. You have worse stats than Bama's quarterback. You have worse stats than Texas. You have worse stats than Washington's. Statistically, if you're going to use that, then you have to use it.
They never thought Washington was a top 4 team either until the very end. That's what gets me. If the top 4 teams are what they thought, Oregon would have been in the playoff. It's like, geez Louise. But yeah, what's his name was throwing for just god awful 100, 115, 120 yards a game, stuff like that. And
Well,
especially that Alabama-Auburn game.
Wasn't throwing the ball very often, but yeah, I don't think we need to defend JJ McCarthy. He's a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. So,
but
what does that have to do with EJ Manuel was the first round pick in the
I understand
draft,
that,
but there was
JJ McCarthy, the last 4 games of the year did not have bad games. He just didn't throw the ball often. You're not going to throw for too many yards in the national championship game when you throw the ball 18 times. You're not going to throw the ball for many yards when you throw 20 times against Michigan.
How many times do you think Brock Glenn was throwing it in the How many times do you think Brock Glenn was throwing it in the national championship game?
Well,
you think he was throwing it 40 times?
I understand that, but we can't make a comparison between JJ McCarthy and Brock Glenn. That's not a comparison.
They did.
So
I understand that, but
exactly. So
JJ
what's the
McCarthy is
comparison
10
between
times better
Jalen
than
Milrow?
Brock Glenn.
All you have is what's on paper and on film. So.
I understand, but we know who's a better quarterback. We
I
know that
don't.
Brock Glenn's not going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft.
I
We'll
don't
see.
know that. He was a true
Uh,
freshman last year, Mark. How do I know he won't be a top 5? I don't know that.
Well, I don't know it, but he's not as a freshman quarterback a top 5 pick in the NFL draft.
But the question would be: Is he a better quarterback as a true freshman than McCarthy was?
No, the question is, was he a better quarterback as a true freshman than McCarthy was as a senior? Because that's the comparison.
According to the statistics, yes.
Well, no, he's not a better quarterback than JJ McCarthy.
But according to the statistics, he is.
Not the statistics I'm looking at. JJ McCarthy was like a top 5 or 10 quarterback in the country statistically.
Well, yeah, he played every game, didn't he?
Well, I'm talking about his passer rating. What was his passer rating last year?
3 games versus 13, Mark. I agree. He
Well,
better have a
no.
better
Passer rating's an average. You could lead you could have the best passer rating in the country and play 1 game. That's not a statistical compilation of yardage. That's a rating.
So what was his rating?
So Michigan was number 8 in the country in passer rating. He threw 22 touchdowns and 4 picks. Okay, let's not argue JJ McCarthy and Brock Glenn. I don't think that's an argument.
Well,
the argument for Florida State is that they went undefeated, that they earned a college football playoff appearance, that if the committee was going to rate the quarterback as an issue and that it was truly an issue, then they did it late in the game after Florida State proved that they could win games with a backup, with a third-string quarterback, and beat a higher-ranked team than Texas did, and they leaped Florida State after Texas beat a lower-ranked team in a conference championship game. So that was all unfair. Absolutely, it was unfair. And maybe the worst statement that I heard out of the committee consistently is that Florida State was significantly, I may be messing up exactly the verbiage, but was significantly a worse team was not the same team without Jordan Travis. Well, if they're not the same team, then you don't drop them 1 spot. If your rankings are reflecting your actual opinion, then be truthful about it. Then drop them to 14 or 18 or something. But the top 8 teams in the country for most of last season, and especially down the stretch, you could put a razor close edge between all of them: Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Michigan, Florida State, Alabama, Georgia, and who am I missing? Texas. Oh, they were razor close until the end. So if you're significantly worse without Jordan Travis, then rank them appropriately. Just don't patronize them by dropping them to number 5.
So would the question have helped if I would have compared Brock Glenn to Jalen Milrow?
Well, Jalen Milrow is not as good a quarterback at this point in his career as JJ McCarthy. Sure.
So the argument,
and Michigan had an undefeated football team, so Michigan's really not in the conversation.
Was in. That wasn't the issue to begin with.
It's more about Texas and Bama.
What they said we wasn't in for. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, if you're going to point to something to say, oh, well, Florida State shouldn't be in because of their quarterback, you can't point to JJ McCarthy whether you think he has the potential to be a top. Like, he just wasn't a big part of their offense. You know, he was, don't throw picks and let's do this thing. Obviously, Jalen Milrow had 3.5 seconds to pass and still was getting sacked at the highest rate in the country. It damn sure ain't him. So it's like, okay, well, the guy out in Washington, Phoenix, okay, put him in. He's undefeated. He won his conference champion. But you never believed him in him either. You thought it was Oregon and other teams. You only put them in there once they kept on winning and beat Oregon, twice, or whatever the case may be. So it's like, you can't – it's not like the other 3 teams had Heisman winners at quarterback. They had, guys with potential, but they weren't out there winning the game for nobody. JJ McCarthy was not winning the game for Michigan. Jalen Milrow, is what it is. He wasn't winning the game for Alabama, as in he just wasn't winning it. He wasn't enough for them to win. That's why they lost to Texas, and that's why they lost in the first round of the playoffs. Florida State, more than any team except for maybe Michigan on this list, they changed their offense. They switched things around. They had a better defense, in my opinion, than anybody. and they were going to come in and run the ball and just throw it when they had to. And also another thing that wasn't taken into account whatsoever is that Brock Lynn had like less than a week to prepare. Just got kind of thrown out there that there's any chance he might have been a little bit better than what you saw out there after a month with one of the guys whose track record on preparation, when you have time like that, stuff like his track record is, greatly shown out there, beating LSU back year, blowing them out at the beginning of the year, stuff like that. So there's a million things. We can get into it all, but
you guys would have to admit it was an ugly offensive performance against Louisville.
It was pretty enough to win.
I don't.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Go ahead, Chris.
It was pretty enough to win. That's what matters.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, sure. If we're just talking about wins, yeah, then we shut down the.
What else should matter?
What did Alabama's
I'm just saying it wasn't a good offensive performance.
I think better than all. It was better than Bama's. What was Bama's like?
Bama's against Georgia?
Not against Georgia. Against Auburn.
Championship game?
Against Auburn.
Well,
what did they look like in that game? That should have eliminated them for the playoffs outright if what you're saying is true about the competition level in the ACC championship game. Then Alabama should not even have been in consideration. They already had a damn loss. So
yeah, I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying that Florida State had a bad offensive game against Louisville.
No, we get you're right, but it's like saying that you have to admit that all the different. Every team has warts. It's like you can have one not so good offensive game. I just don't see how that is in any way a basis to take a team out of the playoff.
No, I agree with you.
It's insane.
I agree with you. Of course. Yeah.
I know we haven't ran Wildcat all year long. And we run Wildcat against Louisville and win the game.
I think a lot of people are saying that shit and didn't watch the game because the performance Lawrence Philly had was out of this world. There was never a time when the offense needed to go show out and do these things. I mean, it dominated the entire game. When we needed yards, we got it. I think Philly ran for 10 yards per carry in the game. It was but it's just a touchy subject for us, obviously. Just aggravating. We're opening up old wounds to make content. By God.
I came away from the ACC championship game thinking, okay, this was a dominant defensive performance. Louisville's not a great offense, but they're a good offense, and nobody else did this to them. So I came away with that. I came away with, okay, you got to understand that even though Florida State had 13 points until they scored a field goal, they beat them 16-6. That you're going to play if your defense is that dominant, you're going to play a conservative game. There's all sorts of teams that do that. Michigan does that all the time. Your defense is dominating. There's no reason to risk it with a freshman quarterback, so you don't need to score 35 points. So your defense is in control of the game. So I came away with it thinking that was a convincing win. The game wasn't close. It wasn't a blowout. Louisville was certainly within contact of trying to do something. They think, what's his name? Plummer threw a pick in the end zone that could have made things different, but Florida State made the play about halfway through the fourth quarter, and Florida State was clearly the better team. Wasn't even close over the 13th ranked team in the country. That's what I took away from the ACC championship game.
Yeah. It's everybody's got all these reasons for FSU, but none of it applies to any of the other teams. There's just it's aggravating. But we'll get data. We'll get another year. Nobody will be able to make the claims and stuff. It's we can't help it. Brock Glenn didn't play against the Cupcakes on the schedule and didn't play all year and wasn't that sharp. It's just they were never going to send him out there to throw at 30 teams and put on some offensive explosion. It just wasn't. It'd be an idiotic thing to do for something that's never been done in history. And there's literally no precedent, no excuse. It's just if Mike Norvell could go back in time, maybe sure he would have tried to throw it more and do all these things. And when Louisville's back was broken, we probably could have put up another 10, 15 points. But
there actually is a precedent for it.
Zero precedent.
Ohio State was in the same situation in 2014. They had to impress the voters, and they had a third-string quarterback who had never played.
But did they have a loss?
They lost.
They had a
First game
loss, but I'm
at
talking about
Virginia
they
Tech.
had to. They were in the same position
Well,
to
that's not
have
what
to
we're talking
impress
about
voters,
zero precedence. There's
and
zero
they had a
precedent.
third-string quarterback that needed to impress voters because they had to jump spots, and they beat
If
Wisconsin
anything, that's
59-0.
supporting our argument because they had a loss and
I
made it
understand
with a
that,
quarterback that hadn't proven anything.
but do you
Like,
understand that I'm just showing you where their situations were
but
analogous.
they had a
If Florida
loss.
State would have had a loss, then yeah, I would say they needed to impress them.
That's
But
What
not
I'm
all things
talking
equal.
about,
They had
we're
a loss.
talking about the performance of the quarterback and the situation that he was in. There is a precedent for that.
So Jalen
That's what I'm
Milroe
talking
had
about.
Totally different situation. Like there's always been a precedent for whose quarterback is better. But when one current team has the loss and one doesn't, that's not equal. That's not.
I'm
That's
not
a
saying
totally.
the teams were equal or their records were equal. I'm
I'm not
talking about
saying you
the
are. I'm
situation.
just saying that's a totally different situation. There's zero. It's a not equal. One loss
The
completely changes
situation
it.
of the game is equal, that you're playing a conference championship game with a quarterback that nobody's ever seen play. And there was an injury, and they had to throw out a third string quarterback, and he lit it up.
So if Ohio State would have
I
been
mean, that's just like
undefeated
a
at that
random
point,
thing that happens.
What's that, Chris?
if Ohio State would have been undefeated to that point, and they'd have came out and won that game by 10 points, they wasn't good enough to get in. See, that
You're
other
asking
side
the
is
wrong
just
guy.
idiots.
You're asking the wrong guy because I would have had Florida State in the playoffs. So I go by record and championships. So you're asking the wrong guy. I'm just telling you
when
what
you look at the
happened.
record, Ohio State had a loss. That's what we're. That's
Yeah,
what we're counting.
I
That it's a
understand
different.
that.
Like if they were undefeated, like it would be, But every single year you're parsing quarterback play. Like we're not sitting here arguing that.
No, the
In this
point.
one game, Brock Glenn was the best quarterback and a playoff quarterback. It's the fact that you're undefeated. They've never left an undefeated conference champion out. That's the
Absolutely.
unprecedented part.
Absolutely.
They're undefeated. Like
Yes.
we're not arguing Brock Glenn should have been the Heisman or anything like that. It's just they're not equal things.
The point
If
I'm
anything, that
making,
supports us because they lost to a team and still got in. But it's like,
yeah, the response that and there were multiple teams making it with one loss, so it was a different situation anyway, because there was just a different situation with a number of teams that had one loss that year. This was a year with 3 undefeated teams. That was a year with 1 undefeated team.
and they were trying to keep
and a
us
bunch
out
of
that
one-loss
year
teams.
too.
What's that?
And they were trying to keep us out that year.
Yeah, I don't know if they could have kept you out, I guess. So I don't know that they were
Going
trying
off
to
what
keep
they
you out.
did the very last year, they damn sure could have.
Well, they didn't though.
Yeah, exactly.
But
That's why it was
the point,
unprecedented.
I was responding to the conversation about the third string quarterback and that being unprecedented in regards to being in a championship game.
But I don't
having
think you
never
think I would
played.
say something so stupid as the first time ever a third string quarterback played in a conference championship game. Like I get what you're saying, but it's like it's just a different conversation.
And that
That
team's
is similar.
playoff bid was on the line. That
Right.
was the point I was making.
For sure. Yep. For sure.